Well, hello everybody. This is a major video, and I put in the link the CBC story by one Alexander Pineda. He's a real piece of work, working for Justin Trudeau, Aaron O'Toole, Jagmeet Singh, complete partisan of the political autocrats. It's disgusting. It's the worst story I've ever read this year. By far, when it comes to the bullshit meter and absolute fake news, this story rings at 90% false, everybody. False. Not an element of it based in any real history whatsoever. Worse, it's a slap in America's face. Alexander does a number on the USA. Especially Republicans, but even Democrats. He slaps the Democrats right in the face. Now I'm going to tell you all. Now he quotes, a Canadian expert who's never been published worldwide. Never, and I repeat, not on any history of any American or Canadian Indians whatsoever. In fact, all of the American Indians, this guy's got nothing. Nothing, everybody. I'm going to say this again. I've read every volume of every war in the Americas in relation to the Americans, Indians, all the way to South America. That's the divider. One people's USA, Canada, and even overlap of Mexico. North American Indian, big history, many wars. Many wars. Besides Africa, there hasn't been any peoples to take as much of colonial force and war like the Americas Indians. That's the fact. That's a fact. Canadian Indians, American Indians are the same people. I have the entire map. I've done this work for 4 years. Not trying to tote my own horn here, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm the expert when it comes to the Americas Indian. That's a fact. I've logged every war that they've ever had with the civilized world. And we're going to go through the CBC story in absolute of all its bullshit. When I say that, I'm sorry, people say, don't swear, but this is a journalist, one of the highest recognized media outlets in Canada, CBC, and they publish a completely unfactual, fake news story to likes of which I've never seen before. Let's go through it in its entirety here. So, Alexander states that America, USA, and Canada's residential school system, the same thing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's an absolute lie. When we look at America, USA versus Canada, and Indian Wars, guess what? There is only one Canadian as the country of Canada since 1867. One war. And that was the Louis Riel Rebellion, Métis Rebellion on the provisional government of Saskatchewan. Yeah, that's right, everybody. There was a provisional government in Saskatchewan going for independence, which was the Northwest Territory, meaning Alberta, Saskatchewan were going to fight their way out of Confederation as territories. They were going to split ski. They were going to fight Canada, stop the railway, stop throwing treaty Indians off their reserve lands, stop bullying the Métis, and absolutely settlers from the West. They were starving. Anyone who looks at that history, I know my family's from Alberta, settled southern Alberta, Sundre, Alberta, in fact. And yes, my great-grandfather worked on the railway with the Chinese and some of the First Nations. And in that settled area, Stony, Dakota. There's a whole bunch of history there, everybody, with the Japanese prisons, all of it, right in my neck of the woods where my family's from. Before Canada was even confederated, before Alberta and Saskatchewan were even provinces. Reality of the story is this. Alexander says residential schools goes into Pennsylvania. Oh, look, it ran till 1974. Well, let's all rewind the clock here. We can go back to Quebec City all the way back to the 1600s. We have Upper and Lower Canada, the old British system, British North American Act. Canada's not a country. And you know what? The British were strong enough to beat around the Americans. They pounded them out. America got independence. All through that time, you can look at all the history. I've read every war. Spanish, Indian, all the way through France and the Indian and assimilation, where residential schools come from, everybody. Where do you think Mexicans come from? That's from absolute 100% assimilation. And not, you want to talk residential schools? Look at Spain. Spain in the Americas right here. What Mexico is. Mexican, Filipinos, same deal. That's absolute assimilation. Murder all the men, rape all the women, give birth to a new generation of a new mixed peoples. Didn't just come overnight. It wasn't a bunch of women falling in love with Spanish or women falling in love with French guys. That's what happened. As painful as it is to talk about all this stuff, that was the history of the 1500s into the 1600s of Canada. And the British did a whole different system of absolute execution of everybody. So there was no assimilation. It was war and kill them all, women, children, all of it. Sorry, that's the history. America fought those colonial systems. 5 of them, in fact. 5 colonials. You want to talk residential schools in Pennsylvania? Do you know who ended that? Richard Nixon did. Nobody knows about it because he's overshadowed in Watergate. You want to talk about Russia and what Russia did to cement the Declaration of Human Rights and what Richard Nixon did for the entire world and all American and Canadian Indians. Richard Nixon finishes it off. Tonight we're going to get into that. We're going to do a double whammy on modules 4 and 5, so I'm not going to spill all the beans about it, but I can tell you that Alexander Panetta is a complete liar. His whole story is fake news. You can go through the USA and you can look at those northeastern and some of the northwestern states who took over the residential school system through the French narrative. I can show you in every regional constitution which ones were absolutely based in France. They're not, they have assemblies too, ladies and gentlemen. They get it from the French system. That's the truth. Now, America beat that away, but it took a lot of time. And it was finished by none other than Richard Nixon. And he was thrown out of office as vice president. Ford finished it off because he became the American president after Nixon, because Nixon had to resign, and he immediately finished off Richard Nixon's work, which was self-determination, settle the claims. American Indians got 500 times more land than all the Canadian First Nations people attached to all treaties. That's a fact. Canada has not followed the States. We're nothing like the United States. They had to have war after war after war, and they had war against the Indians too. And even the Indians loyal, like 6 nations who were loyal to the British, because the British had a might. Even in Canada, they had more might than states like Pennsylvania, like Washington, D.C., where Canada even burnt down the White House, ladies and gentlemen. We won a war against USA. Why? Because USA was overwhelmed in a Mexican war, in a Spanish war, you name it, they had a war against every colonial. And when they were all finished up, ass-kissing Canada, made a deal, the treaties with the First Nations, because there was no war. The British had eradicated British Columbia, the Atlantic provinces, every Indian of Canada inside those coastal regions were eradicated. All the French murdered all the men, raped all the women. That's why there's a Métis. Sorry, I mean, there's a level after a certain point, but initially, that's how it was done. The exact same way Mexico was made, what a Mexican is. Sorry. This is colonialism. It's painful truths. Canada, our politicians were scumbags, were liars. They told the First Peoples a whole different narrative. You're going to get everything. Don't follow America. You don't want their terrible system. We're going to do a much better system. Well, guess what? They perpetuated with Lower Canada the French narrative, turned that into a Canada-wide narrative. After becoming a country, adopted the French narrative of absolute assimilation of the First Nations people, which meant genocide of children. Now, USA, the federal government took the reins, ended it, one Richard Nixon, and you see self-determination for the American Indian and a settlement of the claims. There's a few outstanding, but it's a million times better and 50 plus years ahead of Canada. Canada's continued the genocide until today. And by the way, tomorrow it still goes on, and the day after that, and the day after that. We are based in the Germany system. That writer for CBC, his entire story is absolute bullshit. Not an ounce of truth there. Nothing in correlation with the United States whatsoever. Read regional constitutions. You will find the validity of everything in historical accuracy of Pennsylvania and what Richard Nixon had to do. And here's another thing for everybody too. That writer, that piece of work, that pathetic human being, that paid propagandist by none other than all leaders of the federal parties, all uniformly. Well done. Let's get America and let's put it on America's plate. Hopefully they'll veto any kind of action against Canada by the ICC and what I'm putting forward. Unfortunately for you losers, we have quite the history rollout to give to the American presidency, even Joe Biden, and they're well receiving it, as are the other P5. You dullards are done like dinner, and you can lie to all the Canadians. Your history of genocide is over, you pieces of shit. And you can lie to millions of Canadians, it's only going to be that much worse for you. And when you get writers who write an absolute 100%, well, 90% fake news, total propaganda, absolute false story, and they call that journalism, that man belongs in jail along with the politicians. That's the worst record story I've ever seen. Where do you even get your history books from, pal? Because it's not true. Anyone could Google everything you say in your story and find out it's 100% lie after lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. Regions do things just as provinces have a division of power, especially in property, especially in education, everybody. A federal narrative hijacked. There's no Indian Act in the States that matched anything like Canada. Long since abolished. Here's another one for you guys too. America, 1924. There's the date. Then you can also look at the 30s and what happened with the whole narrative of the American Indian that left what Canada kept going with forever and ever and ever. America voted America first. They set about changing all that. Just like slavery, here's another one. Richard Nixon, in the same time periods when he became president, he physically ended segregation in schools, even though, oh yeah, sure, JFK in the 60s when he was president, he abolished segregated schools, except for no black child ever went to a white school, because if they did, the buses got burnt. They killed all the children, much like the Indian Act. Richard Nixon went there after they were burning buses, and he physically opened those schools himself as President of the United States after JFK was assassinated. I know people don't like the real truth, the hard reality. You'll find this all backed up. Richard Nixon physically opened those schools, just as Richard Nixon physically gave the American Indians self-determination. He physically saw it through. The man was not a fearful man. He was a man who, whatever he said, he physically did, no matter what harm was going to come to him. Faith over fear. That was Richard Nixon. What he said, he did. Whether people like him or not, that's the truth. And there has never been a president since or before Richard Nixon to do as much in real civil rights and world-class works. Because I'll tell you what else. Do you know why Richard Nixon couldn't do for the First Peoples? Because he needed China, the last of the P5. Richard Nixon knew. And once Russia finished their works in the 60s, and we see into 68, 69, when Richard Nixon became president, the first thing he did, now that he had Russia, USSR, one of the communists, he went for China. First American president to go for China, and said, you want your power? You signed the Declaration of Human Rights 1948 right now. They did. A year later, guess what he did? Richard Nixon honors USSR decolonization. Richard Nixon finishes it. So nice try, Alexander Panetta and you lying motherfuckers. Justin Trudeau, Aaron O'Toole, and Jagmeet Singh. You guys are scumbags. You're still genociding. You still have the Indian Act in full swing. We still have 115A and B. You're guilty. All three of you are guilty. Guilty, guilty. And you can pay for news stories from the radical left media to tell German-style Nazi propaganda in 90% fiction. Slapping Joe Biden, Donald Trump right in the face, calling America a genocidal maniac, when the reality is they left you and your disgusting Nazi Germany style system more than 50 years ago. Do the math, everybody. 1972 and 1974. Finalized, cemented 1975. A long time ago, guys. A long time ago. Richard Nixon cemented the Declaration of Human Rights. That's a fact. He did what no other president did in human rights. And people want to talk propaganda. And what did he get for it? He got Watergate, when he's the only one who actually dealt with the communist superpowers and got the job done. And what did he get for it? Watergate. Out on his ass when he was doing the right thing. Wrong means, just like Donald Trump, meant well, but you can never break the American Constitution. Doesn't matter. And people say just a little bit of evil to do a good thing. No, because once you let a little bit in, you bite that apple out of the orchard. We talk about the Garden of Adam and Eve. You take that bite of that apple, even a small bite, you've already invited evil in at every magnitude. You can never do it. People like to run down America. America was victimized by 5 colonials. Russia, 3. China, 3. Africa, 7. Canada, 2. And Canada's a worse perpetuator than a lot of them. Not maybe Africa, but you know what I mean? What America and Russia themselves have done in China, regardless of communism, regardless of people saying America's warmongering, what America did was absolutely an impossible task. It's never been repeated in this world. Under those kinds of harsh conditions, to make a union of 50 states so chopped up, so splurged over into multiple different genocidal, maniacal colonial powers. And people run them down. But America addresses their shit. They get the job done. They get it done well. Better than anybody else. Canada can never ever compare themselves to the United States of America. Never in a million years. You pick a state, you're talking to somebody who's read every state constitution, every war each state has been involved in all of its narratives. Some of which, again, everybody have older systems than the United States itself, the Union of America and America's Constitution. So don't ever ever listen to CBC or any filthy Canadian politician, let alone dirty, corrupt, money-hungry, greasy piece of shit writer for a smut rag like CBC, giving a 90% false story when not an ounce of historical accuracy is even matched there. Lies, lies, lies. Canada is and has always been a genocidal maniac. We have the exact same constitutional monarchy system with Governor General overlap, as was Germany's Chancellor in their system pre-World War II. That's a fact. Adolf Hitler did not go for President of Germany. He went for the Governor General position, the crown power, to take the military, the courts, the judges, the lawyers, the police. Look at it entirely. How did he get all the acts passed? Because nobody could challenge nothing to the Supreme Court. He could have all of his opposition arrested. What do you think our politicians do in a lighter? They just fire the MLA from the party. Either you do what we say, vote the way we tell you, or you're gone. And if we have the crown and we hold those positions under our belt, we have a prime minister who has all the crown positions, he'll just mandate them against you. You'll never get anything challenged to the Supreme Court or any provincial superior court. It'll be overridden. The judges will be overridden, just like Adolf Hitler did. That's what Canada does all the time. They've been doing it before Adolf Hitler, since Adolf Hitler, and long after Adolf Hitler. People don't like these realities. It's 100% true. We are nothing like the United States. Healthcare is provincial. In the USA, healthcare is federal. Totally different systems. Get into education, same thing. Residential schools are not, and I repeat, nothing like each other. There's not even a correlation. It's individual for states. And I can show you American Indian Wars all the way up to 1924. Canada never had any Indian War. So why would they adopt a genocidal assimilation from the United States if they weren't at war with the people? In fact, it was opposite. They made treaties with those people so that they wouldn't go to war, so that they wouldn't go with the United States narrative. And you can look, Canada has all kinds of eradicated First Nations people, Canadian Indians, that should have been treaty in unceded lands. Those people don't exist anymore. But you go to the United States, they still exist. They're even allowed to come up to Canada to enjoy their ancestral homes. USA enforces that. There's a whole bunch Canadians don't know. Maybe First Nations don't know either. I think a lot do in the East and some in BC, but then the Treaty Indian doesn't always know everything that those narratives are known, and then vice versa. There's other narratives the Treaty Indians know that those in the unceded territories or outstanding claims have no idea, or Inuit or Métis have no idea. And then again, they have narratives that everybody else doesn't know. There's so much work to do here, everybody. So much to get out. And don't trust any of the filthy federal parties. All the provincials are corrupt too. It's bad. We're in a full autocracy with a lying media that's caught today. And again, everybody, a 90% false story, historically inaccurate, with all kinds of false narratives, false use of wrong parties, wrong, nothing factual, nothing true. And I can promise you, there are a number of American world experts that will tell you it's all false too. But yet CBC gets away with it. In fact, Canadian writers usurp the American media and write stories against even President Joe Biden, obviously Donald Trump, and they're Canadian. Paid by Canada to spread false propaganda in the superpower of the United States of America. How they get away with it, I don't know. I guess money talks. Corporate media. You wonder where the left narrative comes from? You wonder where the NWO comes from? Look no farther than the filthy autocrat Justin Trudeau, Aaron O'Toole, and Jagmeet Singh. All three of them, and every other party leader, federally, it's all in bed with this. They are NWO, every single one. There isn't one that isn't. Well, I shouldn't say that. Tim Moen, Libertarian Party. There's a few parties where they never got into the crown, and they may not know of it. But everybody gets corrupted when they get it. Nobody wants constitutionalism. No one wants power to the people. This is my video just about home. Share, share, share. It's huge. A lot of information here. A lot of that story you read. Like I said, 90% absolutely fake news. False, false, false. There's no correlation between us and the USA. And when you get into Pennsylvania and those northern eastern states and into the west, American-Indian War went to 1924. And then there was a vote, America First, and it was all ended. What remained in the regions that went up into the 70s was all abolished absolutely by Richard Nixon. 1974, even though he was out of office, his legislation was passed, signed, sealed, certified, and President Ford, his vice president that took over after Watergate, absolutely kept with his word and finished it all off, signed, sealed, stamped, certified. 1971, absolutely Richard Nixon. China, Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, which allowed him to do self-determination and self-government for the American Indian. Did you all know that? Richard Nixon was no dummy, a master of human rights, a master of civil rights, one of the greatest American presidents of all time, could go around the Constitution because executive power of a president is able to do treaties and doesn't have to utilize the Constitution. That's how he did it. Canadian Indians, American Indians, and Canadian third and second class, you can thank the might and the knowledge of one Richard Nixon. Great man. And even before that, look at him as leader of Senate, what he did in the 50s and into the 60s. Unbelievable tasks. Only a real follower of Jesus could get that done. In that kind of time, in that world, a white guy, against all that racism, he did it anyway in the face of it. And he physically went out there and if anyone's going to get killed today or burnt, it's going to be me. And he did that. He didn't let no black kids die. He never let any American Indians die under his watch. He got the job done. No fear, all faith. God bless everybody. Share the video. Get the truth out, because we allow these news stories to go, and Canada will always be its own Nazi Germany. Always. And we're only one election away from, at one point, there is going to be a Hitler coming, and we're all going to pay for it. God bless. Have a great night.